we don't want to miss out. Maybe that's the theme of today's gospel, is that we don't want to miss out, especially on eternal life. This is a really difficult gospel. It's challenging, and it's for good reason, because it needs to be challenging. Today we hear about this rich man, this parable of the rich man and Lazarus, and we can see that it looks like the rich man missed out. Going back to last week, the last verse of the gospel was Jesus saying to us very, very ominously, you cannot serve God and mammon. Mammon meaning wealth in the world. We cannot serve the wealth of this world and also be devoted to God. And it seems like that rich man, he wasn't serving God. He was serving mammon. So there's really something stark about this, is that we don't want to miss out on eternal life. And kind of explaining this gospel, let's look at it. And maybe we'll ask the first question about this gospel as Jesus brings today. Where are we? Quite literally, where are we? What is Jesus talking about? Where's this place in this parable of the rich man and Lazarus? And Jesus is actually talking about a place that would be very common, very well known to people, Jewish people of his time. It's a place called Sheol. Now, Sheol is the Jewish land of the dead. At that time in Judaism, Jews believed that all the dead, no matter if you were righteous or unrighteous, would go to this place called Sheol until the day of judgment, until the Messiah would come and then raise the righteous into a place of more glory. So that's this Sheol. Now, maybe out there, maybe some of you, maybe most of you may have not have heard of this Sheol before. And for probably good reason. It doesn't really, we may not make sense to be part of our Catholic theology, right? Because we believe once we die, we're either going to go to one of two places. Heaven, which is being in God's presence for all eternity, or hell, which is damnation. There's also a third one. There's also purgatory, which is a possibility. It could be where most of us go first. I'm banking on that. I'm probably going to be. I may be there a long time. With much is given, much is expected. So, but purgatory is. Well, we could think of it as a place, but it's also, we can think of it as a process. That it's a process to make us more purified. That if we die, we may not be ready to enter the heavenly kingdom yet. So there may be a need for us to be purified. Sheol might most resemble purgatory for us, that it's this place of kind of in between. But actually, if we go further into this, Sheol fits really well into our Catholic theology. Let's just look at the creed. Now on Sunday, we profess one of two creeds. Most of the time, I profess the Nicene Creed with you. The Nicene Creed talks about how Jesus was, crucified, died, and was buried, and then he rose from the dead on the third day. But the Apostles' Creed is another one we could pray. Now, if you pray the Rosary every day, this is the one that you start with. Now, the Apostles' Creed phrases it a little bit different. It says that Jesus was crucified, died, and was buried. Then he descended into hell. Now, people often ask me about that. They get kind of concerned, like, well, what happens with that? Did Jesus truly descend into hell? Well, yes. Although, I kind of bring it to their attention that there's actually two hells, believe it or not. That's the way they're spelled. They're spelled the same, but one is capitalized and one is not. So there is a difference. There's a hell with a capital H, and there's a hell with a lowercase h. So the capital H hell is damnation. That's eternal hellfire, fiery Gehenna. Small h is different. We can actually probably kind of assume that maybe it's Sheol. That this when Jesus descended into the dead, into hell, he maybe descended into Sheol. That when he was crucified, died, and was buried, and then descended into Sheol. And what happens then is that Jesus does something else incredible. So in our creed, the Apostles' Creed, which one do you think it is? Do you think it's capital H or is it lowercase h? It is lowercase h. So that will make sense, because what Jews believe is that for all of time and eternity, until Jesus, is that all the dead, whether they were righteous or unrighteous, went to Sheol. So kind of feeding off of this, there's a great homily that's an ancient homily that is read by priests and others who pray the Liturgy of the Hours. The Liturgy of the Hours is what I'm obliged to pray 5 times a day. And on Holy Saturday, there's a reading, an ancient homily from an ancient author, and it talks about Christ's descent into hell. And it says that on Holy Saturday that Christ went into Sheol, went into hell, and then broke the gates of hell and brought all the righteous with him into heaven on that glorious Easter morning. So Sheol really kind of fits in to our belief. But let's kind of continue on, because we can see that there's much going on in this place, because Lazarus, who dies, is seemingly a righteous man, and he goes to this place of comfort, as Abraham says, this bosom of Abraham. But the rich man is in a different place. He is being tormented. He's in the same almost area. He can see Lazarus, and he's being tormented. So he asks Abraham, he intercedes to Abraham. He says, please spare me, help me to get where Lazarus is. And Abraham says, it's too late. You had your chance. I'm not going to go and warn your brothers. So there's something dire about this gospel today, is that what we do in this life matters. And what also matters is what saves us is not our being productive. It doesn't matter how much we have accomplished in this life, but how we've loved. That's what will be our salvation. Our faith and love will be our salvation. Faith, as the author in Hebrews says, is that faith is the realization of things that are hoped for and the evidence of things unseen. So it's essential that we have that faith, but also even further than that, not just profess that we believe in the Lord, but to act on that faith. Because that was the downfall of the rich man. The rich man, maybe he knew who God was, but he seemingly didn't act on it. Because he had a poor man right in his face every day, and he didn't act with love towards that man. And so that's what happened. That's what happens, is that he failed in love. He failed to put his faith into action. And really, Jesus is talking often, especially in the Gospel of Luke, about the importance of us being gracious to the poor, being charitable to the poor. That he really finds that we should see the poor, we should see Jesus in the poor. Yesterday was the feast of St. Vincent de Paul. Now, St. Vincent de Paul was a saint who was in Paris, and he was known to really be of great service, of great love to the poor. And he wrote this one time about the poor. He says that oftentimes they may come off to us as maybe looking disheveled. They may look kind of off-putting. But he says that that shouldn't deter us from serving the poor. In fact, we should get past that appearance and see that each of them, even though we don't have Christ bodily present in front of us, is that the poor are Jesus in front of us. And that's something that the last 3 days I've kind of seen. The last 3 days I've been downtown, and I've driven in front of the cathedral each and every of those days. And there's a lot of people out there that are homeless. There's a lot of people who are disheveled. A lot of people who are in great need. And my first thought is to say to myself, well, they really kind of look off-putting. I don't know if I'd want to approach them. They don't look like people I want to go to. But then I remember that at that cathedral, 400 feet to the west, I laid down on that marble floor 4 years ago and was ordained a priest. And so that was a reminder to myself, is like, I can't see them as disheveled people. I have to see them as Christ, who I gave my life to. So that's really the charge of today's gospel, is that we need to put our faith into action. And there's an urgency that it needs to happen today. We can't put our faith off for a good day, for the perfect conditions. We need to act on our faith in the here and now, because tomorrow may be too late. So we don't want to miss out. We don't want to miss out on what God has in store for us. Anybody who's been in business, who's had a successful business, or maybe any successful venture, they'll tell you that if they always keep their goal in mind. No matter what they do, they always keep their goal in mind. And each and every day, each and every step of the process, they're focused on where they want to go. Now, as Catholics, as Christians, we know where our goal is. Our ultimate goal is not to get out of here and go to brunch, but is to go and get to heaven. Is to get to heaven. And that's the most important thing. So just like people who are focused on a great goal, we should always have that goal in mind. We should always be focused on heaven. We should think about heaven each and every day. We should be always focused on how we can get there. How can I better love and serve my neighbors so that one day I may meet Christ face to face? And that's a great responsibility, but it's something that we should focus on each and every day. But not only that, although we don't want to miss out on eternity, we don't want to miss out on what God has for us in the here and now. Because God has so much for us in the here and now. And it's one word that is probably not really understood really well by the outside world, and that's grace. Is that we want to open ourselves up to God's grace more and more each day. Now, as I said, the outside world, the secular world, doesn't really understand what grace is. Because in the secular world, anything you can see, touch, hear, see, smell, that's what matters. Grace often, most of the time, God's grace is intangible. It's things that we can't see. And what grace, if we were to define it, is this freely given gift of God, his unearned gift to us that he gives out of his love. And so if we were reminded of that God's grace is manifested in many different ways. And we can probably think about that. We can look back and realize how God's grace touched us. Maybe you have a family member who has passed, and you may have lived far away from them, but you had a chance to go back and say goodbye. Maybe you had more than enough time to say goodbye. Maybe you were given a period of time to be with them in their last days. Well, that's a grace. That's an unearned gift of grace that God gave you out of his love so that you may know of his love. Maybe you were going through a very difficult time. Maybe you had to deal with the loss of a job or just maybe some difficulty in your life, and you kind of question God. God, why am I going through this? Why is this all happening? But then you get through it, or maybe even in the midst of it, you realize an insight. And you realize that, well, even though God led me, I was led here, God is still with me in this process. God is still with me here, and he didn't abandon me. He has showed me his love. That's God's grace at work. But even then, maybe there's some just simple coincidence that happens. Maybe maybe somebody that you love passed from this world, and you have some image that comes to you, and you're reminded of them. Or maybe it's just something, some prompt comes to you in your soul and says, I need to call this person. I need to go here. Well, that's the prompting of God's grace. That may very well be God acting, giving you that gift of grace in your life to know of his love for you. And the thing is, there's many, many more that I cannot talk about because they're not happening. And God acts in so many varied and different ways, is that his grace is so incredible because of his mystery. So God's grace is abundant to us. It's all over, and all we have to do is just be open to it and look for it. And there's one way that we can especially be open to God's grace, and that is through the sacraments. You're doing it right now. We got one beautiful one coming up at the very beginning of the first sacrament of baptism. The sacraments are what we say in the Catechism, efficacious signs of God's grace. What that means is that they're signs of God's grace that actually have effect in our life. Baptism will help us to know of God's love, but also to act in love to our brothers and sisters, and even other ones too. The sacraments to the outside world, again, going back to the outside world, they may not see sacraments the way that we do in the church. They may see them as just moments along the way. They may just see them as milestones. First communion, that may just seem as something that Catholics do in second grade. Confirmation may be just seen as something that Catholics do in 10th grade. But they're far more than that. They're far more than that. They are signs of God's grace. They're God's effective grace in our lives. Let's look at the Eucharist. The Eucharist, not a symbol. Not a symbol. It's Jesus. It's Jesus. Think about that. Think about that. We have every time we come to Mass, every Sunday, we receive the living God. We receive the living God. Sometimes we don't cooperate with it, though. That's the thing. We can come in here each and every day, and we could receive the Eucharist and just go out, and we can live our lives, and we won't be affected by grace. But if we realize and we ponder that gift of Jesus and his real presence to us, it really could change our lives. It can change our lives because we can be really affected, and we can be relying on God's presence in us each and every day. But even then, let's go further to another one. Let's go to the sacrament of confession. To the outside world, that may be seen as therapy. That, oh, this person's having a bad time, they went to their priest, and so now they feel better, leaving the confessional. The confessional penance is not therapy. It's freedom. Freedom from sin. Freedom from the slavery of sin. And we all need it because we're all sinners. I'm a sinner, we're all sinners. So this is incredible. This is something that the church has given to us to free us from that which binds us. And the thing is, the church, it tells us to go at least once a year. But also, it's important for us also to really take advantage of it more than that. I would say not only once a year, but we should go maybe more frequently than that. Maybe even once a month would be good. Because it really helps us. It is God's help. It is God's gift to us that will help us to live better lives so that we eventually get to heaven. Padre Pio, you may know him. He died in the 60s. Very holy priest, much holier than I am. Was known to spend 10 hours in the confessional a day, about 8 to 10 hours in the confessional each day. And he would tell this to his penitents. He says that you should come to confession frequently, maybe even once a month. And he says, even though we may not need it, even though we may not have a mortal sin on our soul, we should still go frequently on occasion. Because he equated it to like a house. Now, in your house, you have many rooms, and you may not track mud throughout each of those rooms, but they get dusty, don't they? So Padre Pio says that going to confession is like dusting your soul. It's to get rid of that stuff that accumulates, that sin that accumulates, because we all sin. Psalms say that the just man sins 7 times a day. So it's important for us to take advantage of that so that we are cleansed. And so that through that sacrament of confession, we are opened to more and more grace. And that's what God has given to us. He's given us the ability to accept more and more grace each and every day of our lives. And going back to that rich man, he kind of has more of an excuse than we do, because he only had Moses and the prophets. He only had the scriptures. But we have the evidence of someone rising from the dead. That's Jesus Christ. So today, we should take to heart that call from Jesus to put our faith into action, to have faith in God today, and to put it into action today. And if we do that and we love above all else, we won't miss out.